Hi, my name is Chris. I have an MA in anthropology and I've been studying colonialism and world systems for almost 8 years. I like to talk about things like colonialism and inequality and social justice from a global south lens because I am from the global south. I am a Filipino living in the Philippines. And if you're interested in hearing these kinds of things, of listening to a perspective that speaks to the global south rather than to upper middle class white majority, an upper middle class white minority, shall I say, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Now, for a bit of housekeeping, I do not tolerate the presence of Nazis or white supremacists in this space. And if anyone wants to just, in bad faith, provoke outrage in the comments, you're out. I'm removing your comment. Because there's too much fucking hate in this world, so please, while you're here, be kind to one another. Okay? Be nice or leave. So, anyway, back to the subject matter. The question at hand is whether or not we here in the global south, I'm talking about Africa, Latin America, Asia, and Oceania, with the exception of Australia and New Zealand, because they are also themselves technically still colonized, because the lands of the Maori peoples and the first peoples of Australia have not been returned to them. But yes, with the exception of those places, we are officially no longer colonized. But unofficially, the answer is kind of super yes. And I'll get back to that in a bit. But right now, let's go back to that official no of us no longer being colonized. So, legally speaking, and I'm quoting here from the Cornell Law School Legal Information Institute, colonialism is, quote, the act of power and domination of one nation by acquiring or maintaining full or partial political control over another sovereign nation. The country or nation which comes under the control of another foreign nation is known as a colony of that dominating country. See, Euro-American political colonialism officially ended after World War II between 1945 to 1960. And during those years, colonial powers such as the Netherlands, Britain, Belgium, France, and Germany withdrew from their colonial possessions and handed direct political sovereignty over to local governments. Now, hang on to that direct term because it's something we'll discuss shortly. Back to those local governments, though. They now had sovereignty over the territories once claimed by colonial powers, but those governments were shaped by former colonial authorities. Their structures had their roots in institutions that were created to make it easier for colonial masters to extract wealth and labor from local populations. And these local governments, on top of being structured in such a way, were often pushed into a corner and forced to sign treaties and other documents economically favoring their former colonists. This is so much so that in a 2022 article written by an Eswatini economic anthropologist, Jason Hickel, and, well, it was also written by other researchers as well, but it was a really long list, and the first person there was Jason, so, yeah. To quote, they point out that, I quote, the advanced economies of global north rely on a large net appropriation of resources and labor from the global south, extracted through induced price differentials in international trade. In raw numbers, when measured in northern prices, the drain amounted to 242 trillion US dollars over the period of 1990 to 2015. And meanwhile, the global south's losses through unequal exchange outstrip their total aid receipts over that period by a factor of 30. End quote. So in non-academic language, that all basically means that rich countries like those in the US's G7, the UN's the UN's G7, so rich countries like France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, stole over 200 trillion, okay? Trillion. Trillion is 1,000 billion. So 200,000 billion US dollars. They stole them from poorer countries in the global south. And much of that was done through neo-colonialism. And so now the question is, what is neo-colonialism? In 1965, while the colonial powers of Europe were in retreat from Africa, Ghanaian activist and politician Kwame Nkrumah pointed out that, quote, the essence of neo-colonialism is that the state which is subject to it is, in theory, independent and has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty. But in reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from outside. So, examples of such neocolonialism can include how the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, is currently funding the ongoing genocide in Sudan through the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, there, and how the US supported a coup d'etat in Chile, which toppled the democratically elected Allende administration and installed the fascistic Pinochet dictatorship in its place so that it could support the US's emerging neoliberal economic policies. Another example is the way that UN's International Monetary Fund, controlled in large part by the US and to a slightly lesser extent other countries in the global north, the IMF provides highly conditional loans to countries in the global south. And according to the Ashoka University Economic Society, quote, neocolonialist states leverage the pulls of conditional loans, cultural hegemony, and economic superiority to sway another country's foreign policy. Hence, through the asymmetries in power, although the asymmetries in power are more tacit, neocolonialist nations retain control over other countries through continued financial dependence or sizable political influence. In short, neocolonialism is the indirect control of one state over another. If we pay attention to how our respective countries' policies favor the interests of the powerful, we can look at how, for instance, in the Philippines, we used to have a policy where land ownership of real property, was only for Filipino citizens, and for a while back also American citizens, because we were a former American colony. And we had several treaties. I won't count them off, but we had several treaties that really, really favored American economic concerns. And if we pay attention to these kinds of things, we will see how none of us are free. So what do we do about this? Well, honestly, we can take to the streets, but that will not do anything. If we're honest, it can actually put us at risk, which is really, really, really depressing. But we can, for a start, pay attention and educate ourselves about how global geopolitics affects our day-to-day lives and how powerful countries control our homes and dictate the policies that direct our own needs and our government's agendas. Now, I know that a lot of us here have zero faith in our governments, because let's face it, coming from a place where the son of a former dictator is now president and probably like kleptocratic lord and master now, I have no faith in my government, and I'm pretty sure that those of us here in the global south have similar dissatisfactions. And despite that, we have to carry on. So what do? We help each other. We get down into our communities and provide one another with the support that we need. Your neighbor hasn't had the chance to eat a full meal in the past week. All right, make a little extra of whatever you have for dinner and give them some too. You know someone whose, I don't know, chainsaw or blender is broken and you have the skills to fix them? Provide the skills. It becomes a reciprocal form of small scale self governance, which we will need as things kind of dissipate into fascistic terror and impunity. And we will very much need to be there for one another and be kind to one another. So I think I'm going to end there, because even though I've only barely touched the surface of that question of whether or not we're still colonized, of which the answer is very clearly yes, we are still colonized, just not officially. I've barely touched the surface of the nuances that goes into that. And so I'll probably speak more on it later on. But I'm going to end there because I'm frankly at a loss as to what to do. But if you have any suggestions, if you... because there's no one answer, to be perfectly frank. There are hundreds, thousands, millions of answers. And each of those answers have to come from us, and from us understanding our communities. It really comes down to that, to us paying attention and getting out of our own heads and getting out of our own way and being present for one another. So, thank you for being here, and be kind.